Okay, this lesson is on brushes and symbols and how they are used to facilitate processes that require repeated use of items. So in this case, we have some objects drawn on the artboard and we're going to create brushes out of them and symbols out of them. Okay, so right here we have a flower. This flower is just a vector object that I've drawn and colored. I'm going to go ahead and drag it into my brushes palette. Now if your brushes palette is not open, you need to make sure you go to Window and select Brushes. Okay. Now once you have the brushes palette open, you can go ahead and grab it and drag it. We're going to go ahead and start with the scatter brush. The scatter brush allows us to scatter this particular object that we have created in a number of ways. Okay, so we're just going to start with the basic settings that are the default, and we're going to hit OK. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and select off of this. When you create a brush, what basically happens is that when you draw with your stroke, it will create copies of that item. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my paintbrush just because it's easier to maneuver, and I'm going to go ahead and select the brushes, make sure that it's selected. All right, and it's a scatter brush. And when I draw, if I just draw like this, it's going to go ahead and repeat that item on that path. Okay, notice I'm going to go to switch to my selection tool, to my black arrow here. And when I click on it, it's on a path. I cannot actually individually select the pieces no matter how many times I click on them. I'm going to get back out of here. Okay, it's on this path. Okay. So when you draw them, you have to be kind of strategic about how you draw them or what options you select in order for this to change and look a little different, okay? Now if I go in here, I can modify the path. I can grab my direct selection tool and I can change this around, okay? And move it that way if I want these to kind of stagger. Or I could just initially draw the line where it's up and down that way, okay? Now in terms of size and scaling these, I can grab my transform tool or my selection tool here and, grab these and they will shrink proportionately, okay? But if you have a lot of these and you want them to continue to take up the same amount of space, but you just want more flowers that are smaller in here, then what you would need to do is go back into your scatter brush for that particular object that you're trying to affect, double click it, and here's where you can change the options. Now I'm going to make sure that my preview button is on so that you can see what's happening on your screen here. Okay, so I'm going to go to the size and I'm going to shrink the size. Notice it got smaller, but notice the gap between them is still the same. That's your spacing. Okay, and you can close this in and you can just change other settings such as a scatter. Okay, and this is kind of how far it scatters them from that initial line. I'm going to go ahead and leave that at 0. Okay, and then the rotation you can actually change if they're at a slant one way or the other, and you can also do relative to the page or relative to the path, so you can have them shift as the path bends and turns. You can have things rotate relative to that path. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and then it's going to ask me whether I want to leave the strokes that were there before or if I want to apply it to this particular line that I had just created. If you hit apply it to the strokes, it'll change the line. If you say leave the strokes, it won't apply it to that particular line, but in the future, when you create another line, it'll apply it to that next line that you create because you've now changed the brush. Okay, so I'm just going to say apply the strokes right now. Okay, so that stays like that. All right, so that's one way that you can use this. All right, now again, I mentioned that you can create brushes in multiple ways. So I'm going to go and grab this brush here and I'm going to again create a brush, but this time I'm going to create an art brush out of it. I'm going to hit OK. And now you can specify what direction that you're going to draw this in. I like to start at the bottom and go upward, just because when I tend to draw things, I draw them upwards. And then you can change settings here, such as if you want to scale something proportionately, or if you want to stretch it to fit the stroke length. I'm going to start with scale proportionately, so you can see how this works, as opposed to this one, and then we'll look at that one. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to go ahead and click off of that. I'm going to grab my paintbrush and I'm going to make sure that I have my artistic flower brush selected. And then I said I was going to be drawing from the bottom to the top. So as I drag, if I go like this, it's going to make that size of a flower because of the stroke length that I did. Because I said that scale proportionately, it's going to go based on how much I drag my line, how big it's going to make this object, okay? So notice I'm going to go farther, it's going to get bigger. If I go farther up, it's going to get even bigger. So I can make some smaller in the front, I can make some more medium towards the middle, and then I can make some larger in the back, okay? Now it might not be in the particular order that you want it, but I could basically right click, arrange, and send to back so that, you know, the bigger ones are in the back, that type of thing. I can move them over, okay? You'll notice they start bunching up, and this is how you could make like a flower bed if you were using this format, the art brush. Now to look at how this is different than if I were to go and change the settings here, I'm going to go to double click on this tool, and I'm going to change it to stretch to fit stroke length. And basically what this does is that it conforms to the path and it goes with the path. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK and show you. I'm going to leave the strokes of the other one so that you can see the difference. I'm going to say leave strokes. That way it's leaving these here so that when I start drawing these new ones, the new changes will take effect in this new one that I draw. Okay, so with this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag, and if I go straight up, you'll notice it starts skewing them. If I go like this, it'll start shaping it. So this was nice. This is, I mean, it's not nice, but it would be nice if the wind was blowing and you were trying to show something kind of moving, or you're doing a curtain and you have this kind of shape and you want to kind of skew it a little bit more. This might be something nice to add, so to make something look like it's blowing over or it's moving in the wind, that it has some kind of force being applied to it, okay? So just know that you can go in here and tweak these things, and you can decide whether or not you want to apply them to certain objects or not, okay? Okay, now another way that you can use them, I've been using the brush tool, but now I'm going to go to the shape here, and I'm going to go and select the brush that is a scatter brush here. I'm going to go ahead and click it. And you'll notice that when I apply it, it applies it based on the settings that we had before when we shrank it, but we could shrink them even further. We can space them even closer, or we can space them even further apart, okay? Now notice it's affecting all of these because I had that particular brush applied to all of these brushes. So I can decide whether or not I want to just leave the strokes when I hit OK. And I'm just going to say leave the strokes. And then I'm just going to grab this one now that I've changed the brush, and I'm going to apply it to just this one. Okay, so that's the point of the leave strokes or not leave strokes, because all these items that I had affected previously were attached to that brush. In those settings, it's going to ask you that so that you can have that option to change certain things and leave other things different. Okay, so you have that option with brushes. Now moving on, I'm going to go ahead and move these. I'm going to show you a different way and possibly an easier way of doing things, or having more control of where things land as you're creating them. We have the option to create symbols. Okay, now I can grab a symbol like this. If I click on my symbols palette, I can go to Windows, Symbol here. I go ahead and select one of these objects. I can grab this and drag it in here, and I can name it. You could do the same thing with the brush. I didn't name them earlier. I probably should have. But basically, I'm just going to call it pink flower, okay? Since we have two different flowers we're going to be working with here. I'm going to hit OK. So I'm going to grab this symbol here, and notice that now it's not being selected. It's one big shape. If you don't want that and you want to turn it back into a drawing because you want to manipulate it a different way, you would want to right click and you want to break link to symbol. Okay, and then basically it's no longer attached, it's no longer linked to this symbol here. Okay, and I like to do that just because I like to sometimes come in here and be able to edit the color or edit certain things inside of it, and I don't want it to be in one big mass where I can't do that. Okay, so now we have this symbol here. Now one thing you could do is you could just, if you wanted to make like a flower bed, you could just grab this symbol and you could drag them. You can drag multiple instances of this, okay, and position them wherever you want, and you could resize them. Okay, so it's a little different than copy paste, and basically you start building a library of different items. So I could make this one into a symbol as well. Okay, and this is a gradient flower. Okay, the cool thing about symbols is that you can apply gradients into them. The thing with brushes is that you cannot work with gradients. Okay, it won't allow you to create a brush that has gradients in the object. Okay, so for this one we have this one, so you could just start making a flower bed that has this. Mind you, you might want to change slightly different the color of the stems just so that they kind of pop out. But you have this. It might start getting tricky when you make the whole flower together like this. It might start getting a little weird where all the stems kind of match. So sometimes you want to draw the stems separately or the flowers separately, okay? And I'll show you an example of that in a little bit, okay? So this is kind of what you have here. You might want to make the ones that are in the front a little bigger and then the ones in the back smaller, or depending on the perspective, the ones in the back might be bigger and the ones in the front might be smaller, okay? So here we have like a little flower bed, okay? Now another way that you can use these symbols, I'm going to go ahead and show you this tool. It's this little symbol sprayer. It looks like a little spray can. I'm going to go ahead and select that. Okay, notice it has a lot of options inside here. I'm going to go ahead and click that. And I'm just going to go ahead and start pressing. I just pressed. Notice how those are right there, okay? Thing is, if I go into the black arrow, the selection tool here, and I select this, it's one big mass, okay? So a lot of times you don't have a lot of control of what's in here, and that becomes a little bit difficult or problematic in terms of how you want things to look. So within here, all these different tools that we saw, these ones allow you to shift the symbols around within that mass, okay? So we can go in here and we can kind of shape these, okay? Now right now it's grabbing kind of everything because this brush is really big. You can go in here and change the size of your brush. You know, you can double click it and you can do the density and the intensity and also the diameter. Basically it's going to affect how squished everything is together as you're moving things around, and then also the diameter is how big the brush is. Now you could do that, or another way is if you go on your keyboard, the brackets, the left bracket makes the brush smaller and the right bracket makes the brush bigger. So we can go ahead, I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller, and then you can kind of pick the little areas that you want to manipulate. And this one right here is kind of moving things around. So this is a shifter brush, okay, so that you can move things like this. I'm just moving these down, okay. Now it's not super accurate, but it might allow you to do some tweaking that you might want. Okay, and now if you go in here, you can do the other one. You have the scruncher. If you do this, they'll all start gravitating towards that point, so it'll scrunch them in towards that area. Okay, so as you have gaps, you might want to scrunch them into those areas. Okay, and then if we go back over here, we have other options such as a sizer tool, and we can, wherever we click, it's gonna throw those there. And then we have the spinner tool. And kind of rotate these around just to add some variation so they don't look so copy and paste exactly the way they are. And then we have the symbol stainer tool, and you have to select a fill first. I'm going to go ahead and pick a green. Notice by default this goes into grayscale. If you want to change that back to that green, you would either want to select RGB, or in our case our project requires CMYK, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave it on grayscale. Okay, and then you can drop the color in there. Okay, and then we have the option to screen things back, and this allows certain things to be a little transparent. So you'll notice I'm going to click a couple times so you can see that some of the items become lighter. It's basically adding some opacity to the objects. Okay, all right, so that's your symbol sprayer. Now what I like to do, because I don't like necessarily how that creates things for me, what I sometimes do is use a combination of these tools, or sometimes I use the brushes in a different way. So I might come in here and create brushes of the individual pieces. Like I might come in here and that as a separate art brush, and that art brush will be scaled proportionately. I'm going to hit OK. And then what I'll do is I'll draw where I want my stems to be. And I'll pull if I want them to be really long, so that way I can pick where I put them. And then I'll go into my symbols tool here, and sometimes I'll just create this as a symbol. Okay, just the petals. Hit OK. And then I'll add them where I want them. Okay. Or I can do it with the sprayer tool. But personally, I prefer to drag them separately this way. so that they're in their own symbol and I still have the ability to very easily manipulate the areas. Okay, it's really up to you. Whatever you feel will control it best. Okay. Okay, so that concludes your lesson on brushes and symbols. If you have any questions, ILED@hawaii.edu or 808-343-9565.